Boy, in a sea of darkness, there's a little bit of good news out of Congress, of all places. It looks like last week that you saw people from both parties come together, which normally when that happens, it's a bad day, because the only time you ever see agreement between Republicans and Democrats is normally when they're coming together on the worst issues, like, say, Medicare Part D or the Iraq War. But in this case, you had Republicans and Democrats, and it was a minority of Republicans, but still a substantial contingency, coming together to actually end wars and to oppose more death and destruction. I have to say that this is one of the most positive trends in American politics that I had not anticipated in the last few years. I would have never expected that you would have had a sudden shift in the Republican Party, which had been so ridiculously hawkish, to a cartoonish degree during the Bush administration, to see such a wide shift. And it's still a minority within the party, but still, the fact that there are people in the party, in the Republican Party of all places, questioning the U.S.'s role as sort of the progenitor of endless wars that nobody ever seems to win and never seems to get us anywhere. And it's a different approach from, say, your anti-Iraq war Democrats, which were also a minority within their party, because they're not making the the bleeding heart argument. They don't really care so much about the victims and the people who are getting killed in these wars, but they are making sort of the common sense legislator calculus, sort of saying how is sending more people off to die in Iraq and Afghanistan, how does that help people in my district? They're just making that very simple calculation. And of course the answer is it doesn't help anyone to send off more soldiers to kill more people in the Middle East. It only creates more problems. It creates more jihadis who hate America and want to kill Americans because they're mad because their whole family picnic was droned and everyone they ever knew is dead now, and they're the only survivor. Now they're out for blood, and they want to kill somebody else's family. And then when you think to yourself how many times that's happened over the last 20, 30 years of American involvement in the Middle East, you start to realize that perhaps the U.S. being so involved in the Middle East hasn't gotten us anywhere. Perhaps it's actually hurt America and made us less safe. You actually now have mainstream Republicans now, I think, that they're not nearly where Ron Paul was at, but they're moving in that direction. You can see that mindset is starting to take hold. That, maybe these guys might keep attacking us and might causing more problems for us because we're causing problems over there. And so even if I don't care about the people in the Middle East, all I care about is the safety of Americans, it still doesn't make sense for us to be over there. Perhaps 18 years in Afghanistan is long enough. There are today adult men being shipped off to Afghanistan to fight and die, who will die in that war, who were not born before 9/11. That's going to start happening this year because it's been 18 years since 9/11. And in that 18 years, the Taliban controls just as much territory as they ever have. They control all their areas. And if you look at Iraq, what did the Iraq War get us? The Iraq War gave us a satellite state of Iran, who we're told is our mortal enemy for some reason. Anyone who looks at this honestly is not just a shill for defense contractors like, say, Tom Cotton or John McCain. You can't look at what the U.S. has done since 9/11 and say that any of it has been successful. And thanks to these terrible failures known as Iraq and Afghanistan, it seems to be incubating some people in Congress, and again, even Republicans, namely Paul Gosar and Matt Gaetz, are who I've seen out the most. Matt Gaetz I've seen quite a bit, and Matt Gaetz, actually, I used to think he was kind of a dumb idiot when I heard him speak, because everyone, when they go on Fox News, they're pandering to, 65 to 55 plus baby boomers, and so they say some pretty dumb stuff. But when it seems to me that Matt Gaetz actually is a more well thought out person than I had given him credit for. I guess not everyone is in real life is how they are on Fox News. And so this now this foreign policy skepticism has wormed its way. This foreign policy realism has wormed its way into this year's National Defense Authorization Act. Now, of course, the National Defense Authorization Act is something that has to be passed pretty regularly in Washington because the Constitution does not allow for the creation of a standing army. the military always expires. So in order to keep re-upping the military to keep a standing army, they have to pass a National Defense Authorization Act. I think it's every 2 years, according to the Constitution. Of course, that's more of a loophole. The Constitution does not intend for there to be any standing army. They intended there to be, hey, we need to go to war. Congress can create an army, but after 2 years, they have to demobilize. That was how it was intended, but we're far away from that. There's no point arguing over the Constitution. It's long dead and gone. And so this year's National Defense Authorization Act had a bunch of amendments in it, really, that one repealed the 2001 authorization of use of military force in Afghanistan, and they intend, unfortunately, to replace that with another authorization of use of military force. However, they're trying to make it a more of a narrow authorization, so that the president, this president and future presidents can't use that authorization to justify a bunch of wars everywhere else. They can't just use that as a blank check to start wars wherever they want. And of course, they also have an amendment to completely repeal the 2002 AUMF against Iraq, because the Iraq War is long gone now. The Iraq War is over. So there's no reason to still have that authorization, which could be, again, used by the executive branch to justify another war somewhere else. And then, of course, they also put language in the NDAA that essentially said the president cannot go to war in Yemen or Iran without congressional approval. That is, one would think that that's pretty obvious that they can't go to war because, Congress declares war, but presidents have been doing this for a long time. The U.S. hasn't declared war on any country since World War II. Yet in that time since World War II, the U.S. has been at war in many countries, just without actually declaring it. Now, of course, the hawks in the administration are very upset about this, so Trump, I'm sure at their behest, threatened to veto this NDAA because he says it's curbing his power, and of course I'm sure that's really what he's worried about, not so much that it's kind of an anti-war type thing. I think the president probably would agree with the sentiment behind this. I just don't think that the president likes having his own power taken away. Nevertheless, this is a win-win situation. Either Trump signs this NDAA and it implements these positive changes, which again are not a panacea. Passing this NDAA would not end the war state. By contrast, it actually would, extend the war state, because that's what the NDAA always does. The NDAA is the National Defense Authorization Act is what authorizes the war state. So obviously, it would be better not to have a National Defense Authorization Act. But getting rid of a bunch of these risks and trying to constrain the executive branch's power with respect to foreign policy is positive development. However, if Trump does veto this, then it kind of is a panacea, because then there's no more National Defense Authorization Act. He can't run any more wars. He'll be shooting himself in the foot. Instead of taking accepting restricted powers on the executive's ability to, invade a bunch of countries, he's going to have to withdraw forces, because without the NDAA, you can't fund all of these forever wars. So I can't wait to see where this is going, and I love that you have... Now, of course, the Democrats really are only anti-war in this case, it would seem, because they just don't like Trump, which I'm fine with. I don't care. Whatever their motivation is, if they're doing the right thing, I don't care if their heart's in the wrong place. But with regard to these, I believe, 27 Republicans who voted with them, their hearts are definitely in the right place, because they're standing up to a president that they very much like. Somebody like Matt Gaetz and Paul Gosar, I believe they're big MAGA guys, so they're not really in a position to where it benefits them to resist Drumpf, as the Twitter resistors like to say. So I'm going to keep an eye on this and give you guys an update on where it goes and see if Trump vetoes it or not. So if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and subscribing. And if you do subscribe, please do click the bell, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.